Hello and welcome back to Lab 3 Introduction to Amazon EC2. I'm Richard Golson, and we are taking a look at Task 4, Resize your instance, the instance type in EBS volume settings. So consider that as your needs change, you might find that your instance is overutilized, meaning it's too small. It can't keep up with requests, or it's underutilized. It's too large. And now we're spending more money than we need to spend. So if so, we can change that instance type. So if a T2.micro, which is what we're using, is too small for its workload, we can change it to something like an M5.medium instance. Similarly, we can change the size of a disk. If we find that the disk is too small and we're running out of disk space, we can modify the size, increase the size. Or we find that the disk was not, that size disk was not needed, we can reduce the size, and that should help reduce our costs. So in order to make those kind of changes, we will need to stop the instance. So to do that, a stopping of an instance is a shutdown. Now, one of the cool things about stopping instances, there's no runtime charge for a stopped EC2 instance. What we are charged for is the storage. Hence, using as the least amount of storage as possible will benefit us there. On the EC2 management console, in this pane, we're going to select the web server. And instead of using actions, we're going to go to instance state. And notice that we have three choices: stop, reboot, or terminate. Reboot's great if you make a modification. Let's say we're using something like Secure Shell, interacting with the instance, and we make a configuration change through the operating system. Then rebooting the instance from here would send a signal to the operating system to reboot, and would reboot the whole thing. And that's great. We're going to use stop instance. One other setting is the terminate instance, and that's something we'll be taking a look at a little bit later on. But with the terminate instance, that would actually completely remove our instance. It would terminate it and delete all resources. So let's do the stop instance. We're not ready to terminate. And it just reminds us that we're no longer charged for the instant usage, for the runtime, or the data transfer fees, but we're going to get billed for the EBS volume, which is associated with it. And if we assign an elastic IP, which we learned about in the network or VPC module. So we'll go ahead and stop it. And we can see this in the stopping state. What we want to wait, we want to wait till it says stopped. While we're waiting, we'll scroll up here. Generally does not take too long, and you can hit the refresh. I'll go ahead and put it in pause and we'll come back. Okay, we can see it has successfully stopped. I'll clear that message at the top. With the web server selected, I'll go to my actions menu, and this time I'm selecting instance settings, and I want to change the instance type, which is right here. So currently we're using the T2 Micro, which is free tier eligible. I do not want to use the T2 Micro anymore. So what I can go ahead and do is clear this setting and select T2.small from the list. There it is. When I do that, it provides a comparison of what it's currently configured and what I'm going to, and you can see the price will approximately double. And it also shows you what we've actually modified, which in this case is we're bumping up the memory, we're doubling it. Everything else is staying the same. So we'll go ahead and select that. And then one more thing to take note of that they mentioned here, we could be restricted from other instance types. These are lab restrictions having to do with the lab role that we've been assigned and the permissions that are allowed under that role. So again, when we're interacting in the labs, when you're interacting in production, you'll be provided a set of permissions, and that will potentially constrain what you're able to do or not able to do. We'll go ahead and hit the apply. And then let's note that we are now configured for a T2.small. And then the next thing I want to do is set the EBS volume. One other thing to take note of, and I almost skipped this one, so it's an easy one to miss. We're going to change the instance settings and we're going to change the stop protection, and we're going to enable that. So when you stop at that instance, the instance shuts down. When we start the instance again, it's typically migrated to a new underlying host server in AWS's environment, meaning that it ends up getting assigned a new public IPv4 address. So note that when we stopped it, that public IPv4 address was released back into the pool. When we start it, because we've enabled the public IPv4 address setting, a new address will be assigned to the EC2 instance from the pool. Hence why there is an option for an elastic IP address that I could assign. You can see it right here. And that would allow me to retain that assigned public IP address. Okay, so let's go ahead and make that change here. So from the actions, which I'd almost skipped this one, right? We'll go to our instance settings, and then we want to change the stop protection. And we're going to enable it. So this would protect the instance from being stopped and losing its public IP address and losing access to it, right? If this is a web server, typically you don't want to stop it. You want to keep it running if it's in production. Okay, so it's still in a stop state, but now we'll prevent it from being able to stop. We're prevented from being able to stop the instance. Notice that stop instance is now grayed out. It's no longer an option on there. So let's go ahead and get into resizing the EBS volume. So note that we have the web server selected, and what we want to do is change its volume. And if we come over here, you can see there's the volume. So it has a volume ID, right? This is a virtual volume on one AWS storage server. So what I want to do is click on this link. I could go to the volumes menu and I'd see 2 volumes in there. And then I would need to figure out which one is connected to my web server, and there it is. So I could go at it from either way. I'll go ahead and select this one, right? Now that I've selected the appropriate volume, and I want to make sure that I'm in fact resizing the web server volume, or the one that's attached to the web server, I'll go to my actions, modify volume. So notice all the options we have here. Besides changing the size, which we're going to set to 10 gigabytes, notice that we can change it from a GP3 to a GP2 or an IO1, et cetera, et cetera. We can even change it to magnetic or old-fashioned hard disks, right? The magnetic disks. We're going to leave it at GP3, but we are going to increase the size. There's other settings in here as well that we can modify. We'll go ahead and hit the modify button. And it just provides us a warning or information that when you increase the size of the volume, you'll have to use the file system of the EC2 instance that's the volume is attached to extend the file system to that increased volume. So that increased size of volume, or increased volume size, that additional 2 gigabytes in this case does not have a file system. So the operating system wouldn't be able to actually use it. So you would need to go in there and configure that. AWS provides information about how to do that, but they're standard Linux or Windows procedures. So we'll go ahead and modify it. That also will then increase the cost of this volume in terms of storage costs, et cetera. So we've increased it to 8 gigabytes or to 10 gigabytes. Now what we want to do is start the resized instance. So we'll go back to our instances, select the web server, go to our actions, go to our instance state. I always get those two confused. Hit start. And it tells us it successfully started. Notice there were two messages because I had left one behind. So I'll go ahead and close out those messages right here. There we go. So it's in a pending state. We're waiting for it to get started. And if I refresh here, I'll start seeing information being applied shortly. We'll go ahead and pause the video and come back. Okay, that shouldn't have taken too long because basically it's starting up again and it doesn't have to do much of anything on the startup beyond just a standard startup, although we did make configuration changes. One of the things you'll need to note is that the public IPv4 address, although similar, is not identical. This is a 54.163.142.230. If I come to this page and refresh it, you will see that it will eventually fail. So what I want to do is get the new public IPv4 address and use that to access the web server. So this is no longer a valid address because when we stop the EC2 instance, the public IPv4 address was released back to the pool of addresses. And when we started the instance, it drew another IPv4 address from that public IPv4 address pool. So there you go. So we're up and running. Our configuration changes have been made. If we take a look at the storage, you can see that we have a 10 gigabyte block device. And as we noted earlier, our EC2 instance is now T2.small. All right. That's enough for this task. When we come back, we'll take a look at exploring EC2 limits. I'll see you then.